where we won't know what he's up to, is not going to change his behaviour.
It was a cold, drizzling night in London, the kind of night where the shadows of Buckingham Palace seemed to stretch longer than usual, hiding secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. For Queen Camilla, this was the beginning of the end. Only hours before, she had been in Scotland, playing the role of a devastated mother, but now, sitting in the back of a sleek black car speeding toward the palace, her face was a mask of pale terror. The flickering streetlights outside reflected the chaos within her mind. She knew the summons she had received wasn't a request, it was a demand. Just minutes after she crossed the threshold of the palace, the life she had meticulously built over decades would vanish. The title of Queen Consort, a title she had coveted, waited for, and finally held with such pride, was about to be stripped away in a rare, explosive fit of fury from King Charles. At the same time, miles away, her son Tom Parker Bowles was staring at an emergency court summons that would change his life forever. The charges were staggering. Serious violations of the royal family's financial regulations, a scandal so massive it threatened to pull down the very pillars of the British monarchy. But to truly understand the magnitude of this betrayal, we have to go back exactly 1 week. The scene was a private family dinner at Buckingham Palace. On the surface, it looked like a rare moment of unity. King Charles sat at the head of the table, his face etched with the exhaustion of his duties. To his right were Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The atmosphere was quiet, almost peaceful, until the shrill ring of Camilla's mobile phone shattered the silence. Everyone watched as she glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. She took the call, listening to a voice on the other end that spoke with urgent, hushed tones. When she stood up, her hand trembled slightly, and the sound of her wine glass hitting the table was sharp, like a gavel. But as she spoke, something felt off. There was no panic in her voice, no maternal instinct of terror. "Charles, I must fly to Scotland immediately," she said, her voice remarkably controlled. "Tom has been in a serious car accident. But about the meeting tomorrow, the review of the royal funds, we must postpone it. I cannot be absent for that." William, ever the observer, felt a chill of suspicion. He watched his stepmother closely. Why was her first thought the financial meeting and not the extent of her son's injuries? Catherine glanced at William, her eyes mirroring his confusion. Charles, ever the trusting husband, agreed immediately, his concern for Tom overriding any administrative thoughts. But for William, the seeds of doubt were sown. He spent the night in his office at Kensington Palace, replaying the scene over and over. He told Catherine that Camilla's reaction was not that of a mother whose son might be dying. She didn't ask about blood, she didn't ask about the hospital, she only asked for time. Time to delay the audit he had been pushing for. William knew that the upcoming review was not a mere formality. It was a deep dive into 10 years of expenditures, specifically looking for large transfers that had vanished into third-party companies. As the future king, William's loyalty was to the crown first. He secretly ordered a surveillance team to follow Camilla to Scotland. What they found was the smoking gun. Camilla never went to a hospital. She wasn't holding her son's hand at a bedside. Instead, she was holed up in a luxury lakeside hotel, miles from any accident site, meeting with unidentified men behind closed doors for hours. The accident was a ghost, a staged event designed to buy the one thing money couldn't buy, time. William realized that Tom Parker Bowles wasn't just a son. He was the primary intermediary, a conduit through which royal funds were being siphoned into offshore accounts and personal projects. The realization was a heavy blow. Camilla was using her own flesh and blood as a shield for a financial scheme that had been bleeding the monarchy dry for years. William knew he couldn't just tell his father. He needed proof that was undeniable. He needed the man who held the keys to the kingdom's secrets, Richard Harrington, Camilla's longtime lawyer. The investigation moved into the shadows, a high-stakes game of chess where one wrong move could destroy the reputation of the royal family forever. William was no longer just a son or a prince. He was a protector, ready to face the storm that was about to break over the House of Windsor. The silence in Prince William's office at Kensington Palace was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of a mouse as he scrolled through the encrypted files sent by his private security team. The investigation into Camilla's activities in Scotland had opened a Pandora's box that no one in the royal family was prepared for. While the public believed the Queen Consort was at the bedside of her injured son, the digital trail told a far more sinister story. William discovered that the lakefront hotel where Camilla stayed wasn't just a place of refuge, it was a temporary command center. For 3 days, encrypted data bursts had been sent from that location to several offshore jurisdictions, including the Cayman Islands and Panama. This wasn't the behavior of a grieving mother. This was the frantic work of someone attempting to wipe a digital footprint before an avalanche hit. William knew that if he moved too slowly, the evidence would evaporate into the ether of the dark web. He decided it was time to put immense pressure on the weakest link in Camilla's inner circle, Richard Harrington. The lawyer was a man of tradition and status, and the threat of losing his license and facing a public trial was a weight William knew would eventually break him. When Harrington was summoned for the second time, the atmosphere was even colder. William didn't greet him. He simply played an audio recording, a wiretapped conversation between Tom Parker Bowles and a known financial fixer in Zurich. In the recording, Tom's voice was frantic, discussing the Queen's personal ledger and the need to reclassify £30 million before the end of the month. Harrington's face went from pale to a ghostly translucent grey. He realized then that the Prince of Wales wasn't just fishing for information. He already had the net closed. "Mr. Harrington," William said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "the Crown doesn't care about your loyalty to Camilla anymore. We care about the survival of the institution. If you don't give us the access codes to the shell companies registered under Parker International, you will be named as a co-conspirator in a treasonous financial fraud case against the British state." It was at that moment the dam broke. Harrington began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rush of fear and regret. He confessed that the siphoning began years ago, initially as small transfers to cover Tom's gambling debts and failed business ventures, but it soon spiraled into a systematic looting of the sovereign grant and private royal estates. Camilla, according to Harrington, felt that her position was always precarious, especially with the looming reign of William. She wanted to ensure that her biological children, Tom and Laura, would have a fortune that eclipsed any royal inheritance they might be denied. The Scotland accident was the masterstroke of their desperation. Tom had deliberately driven a sacrificial vehicle into a ditch on a private road, ensuring there were no witnesses other than a prepaid, local farmer who called the emergency services. While Tom sat in a private clinic with minor bruises, Camilla was using the diverted attention to authorize the final, massive transfer of funds that would have secured their future forever. Harrington provided the digital keys to a series of hidden folders that contained shadow ledgers, real accounts that showed the discrepancy between what was reported to the king and what was actually spent. As William looked at the numbers, the scale of the betrayal became sickeningly clear. Millions of pounds intended for the upkeep of historic estates and charitable foundations had been funneled into luxury real estate in Dubai and secret art collections in Geneva, all held in Tom's name but controlled by Camilla's shadow. Meanwhile, in Scotland, the walls were closing in on Camilla. She had noticed the subtle change in the behavior of her royal protection officers. They were no longer just guarding her, they were watching her. Every time she tried to make a private call, a shadow seemed to linger near the door. The tension between her and Tom reached a breaking point during their final night at the hotel. Tom, fueled by whiskey and terror, began to blame his mother for the mess. "You told me the audit was just a formality," he hissed, his voice echoing in the opulent suite. "Now the palace has frozen my personal accounts. They know, Mother. They know everything." Camilla, ever the stoic, gripped her glass until her knuckles were white. "Quiet, Tom," she whispered sharply. "We have handled crises before. As long as Charles believes in me, William can do nothing." But her confidence was a facade. She didn't know that at that very moment, William was showing their shadow ledgers to the king. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. For Charles, who had defended Camilla against the world for decades, seeing proof that she had used his trust to build a secret empire at the expense of his legacy was a wound that would never heal. The stage was set for a confrontation that would dismantle the hierarchy of the palace and change the line of succession's influence forever. The final confrontation took place in the Oak Room of Windsor Castle, a place usually reserved for the most private and solemn royal matters. Outside, the wind howled through the ancient trees, mirroring the storm brewing inside. King Charles stood by the window, his back to the door, looking older than he had ever appeared. When Camilla entered, she attempted to maintain her regal composure, but the presence of Prince William standing like a silent sentinel beside the king told her that the time for pretenses was over. Without turning around, Charles placed a single folder on the heavy mahogany table. I spent 40 years protecting you, Camilla. The king's voice was a ghost of its former strength, trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and cold fury. I defied my mother, my children, and the people of this country to put that crown on your head. And this is how you repay the crown. By treating the sovereign grant like a personal bank account for a son who cannot even stand on his own 2 feet. Camilla tried to speak, her voice cracking as she reached out a hand. Charles, please, everything I did was for our security. I was afraid of what would happen when things changed. But William stepped forward, his eyes flashing with a stern resolve. Security? You staged a life-threatening accident in Scotland to distract from an audit. You used the police and medical resources of this country as props in a theatrical scam. That isn't security, Camilla. That is high treason against the trust of the monarchy. The evidence William presented was insurmountable. The shadow ledgers, the confession from Harrington, and the intercepted calls from the Lakeside Hotel formed a noose that Camilla could not escape. The king's decision was swift and surgical. He informed her that the title of Queen Consort, a position that requires the utmost integrity, was being revoked immediately. There would be no public trial to save the family from further embarrassment, but behind the palace walls, the punishment was absolute. Camilla was to be moved to a private estate in the countryside, stripped of her royal duties, her staff, and her access to any public-funded resources. Her biological family, specifically Tom Parker Bowles, would face the full weight of the law through a quiet but devastating civil suit to recover every penny of the siphoned £30 million. As the reality set in, Camilla's facade finally shattered. The woman who had fought so hard to be accepted by the British establishment was now an outcast within her own home. She was led out of the room not by a lady-in-waiting, but by a security detail, her footsteps echoing hollowly down the long corridor of history. In the days that followed, the palace issued a series of carefully worded statements. While the public was told that Camilla was stepping back due to prolonged health concerns, the internal shift was seismic. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was immediately tasked with taking over the patronages and responsibilities that Camilla had once held, symbolizing a clean break from the shadows of the past. William and Catherine worked tirelessly to implement a new era of financial transparency, ensuring that every pound of the royal budget was tracked by independent auditors. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about survival. William knew that for the monarchy to endure in the modern world, it had to be beyond reproach. He had proven that even the highest-ranking members of the family were not above the law. The scandal, though painful, served to strengthen the bond between Charles and William. The king finally saw his eldest son not just as an heir, but as a formidable protector of the throne's integrity. As the sun set over the Thames, the British monarchy stood at a crossroads. The era of Camilla had ended in silence and disgrace, hidden behind the grey stone walls of a country manor. Tom Parker Bowles, now facing a mountain of legal debt and public shame, became a cautionary tale of greed and entitlement. The story of the staged accident in Scotland would eventually leak into the history books as one of the greatest internal betrayals in royal history. But through the chaos, a new light emerged. The people saw a future king in William who was willing to put justice above family loyalty, and a future queen in Catherine who brought stability and grace to a fractured institution. The crown remained, but the heads that wore it had learned a bitter lesson. The throne is a gift from the people, and that gift can be taken away the moment trust is betrayed. The shadows had been chased away, but the scars would remain forever, a permanent reminder of the week the Queen Consort almost brought down an empire.